Pleasure to be here with my esteemed colleagues. Noting, of course, that these comments reflect my own opinions, not those of my employer. It's now well known the energy crisis, kicked off by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, reshaped global energy markets, and placed Europe on a new energy trajectory. There's three things I want to highlight for the group today that we've learned from that and are going to affect decision-making going forward. First, Europe managed the loss of Russian gas through a combination of LNG imports, demand reduction, and the acceleration of renewable energy. Oftentimes we miss the latter two factors in that story from the United States perspective. Second, the financial and infrastructure challenges that transition brought still need resolution today. And finally, there remains to be the need for the U.S. to craft a long-term strategy to address Russia's role in global energy markets to achieve long-term lasting support for Ukraine as well as larger geopolitical aims. A lot of my comments today are based on a report that we published earlier this year. The title, Power Plays, Europe's Response to the Energy Crisis. It's in the materials we shared, and I brought one copy in case anybody's hyper interested. When Russia weaponized its energy exports following the invasion of Ukraine, Europe was forced into an unprecedented test of energy resilience. The scaling here actually matters. Russian fossil fuels made up 1/5 of the EU's energy consumption and quickly dwindled to just now 5% in a matter of a couple of years. That's a really large shock to what usually are relatively stiff systems. A critical part, as we just heard, and I think is becoming more and more well known, was that Europe's survival strategy involved ramping up natural gas imports, particularly LNG from the United States. Between 2021 and 2022, European imports of US LNG doubled, rising from about 30 to 70 billion cubic meters in each year, and most of that coming from Europe. And Europe is now also the primary market for US LNG exports. So the integration is quite large on either side. Buying such large quantities of LNG from global markets required European buyers to pay high prices, peaking in summer 22, but those have now settled to about double pre-crisis levels. At the same time, Europe, I think, made significant strides in renewable energy. And wind and solar projects were expanded dramatically. There were changes to permitting regimes, and that demonstrated that energy transition really can support energy security for energy importing countries. While Europe already had significant renewable generation pre-crisis, the expansion, particularly in solar, deserves note. Renewable capacity also adds up year over year as well. For the 2 years of this energy crisis, Europe added about 3% of its generation needs in solar each year. As that capacity builds, that's expected to reduce the need for gas and coal and power generation going forward. The combination of quick action on LNG imports and the expansion of renewables helped Europe weather the storm and keep the lights on, but that came at a significant cost. The rapid transition away from Russian energy imports cost Europe dearly. The fiscal outlay to shield consumers and firms from the rise in energy prices amounted to $650 billion approximately by mid-2023. Across different European countries, this spending ranged from 1% to 7% of gross domestic product. This is U.S. Department of Defense levels of spending. That's absolutely unsustainable in the long term. The costs of Europe in energy, which are still, again, twice those in the United States, were recently highlighted in Mario Draghi's report, The Future of European Competitiveness, as a threat to industrial competitiveness in Europe. And to address this, the report cited, and I think this is kind of now emerging consensus, Europe will have to invest further in additional infrastructure that will enable decarbonization and reduce energy costs by improving security. Indeed, we now see a lot of that investment happening. New natural gas infrastructure will meaningfully move European countries off of Russian imports for good. For example, the Vertical Corridor pipeline project in the southeastern part of Europe is going to link gas systems from Greece to Ukraine and will really help, particularly in the case of Moldova and Ukraine, get off Russian gas imports. Likewise, the Adriatica pipeline in southern Italy will connect points from North Africa to points beyond in Europe. And the Baltic pipeline connected Poland to Norway and was turned on, I think, very closely to the explosion of Nord Stream 2. The point is, like, a lot of that, I think, is actually happening. The infrastructure necessary to secure long-term energy supplies is being built. Likewise, as those renewables are deployed, we're going to see a need for interconnection and transmission infrastructure similar to the one we're seeing here in the United States. Europe's pursuing expanded transmission capacity with projects like the Biscay Gulf interconnection linking Spain and France, the New Connect project linking the UK and Germany. I'll note that even more than pipelines, these international connectors actually require a great deal of trust between the countries on either side because they link to the electricity system on either side, and those things seem to be in constant balance. And so the geopolitics of large-scale and electricity transition actually introduce new dependencies for Europeans that we might not, that are still being sort of probed and well, need to be well understood. Lastly, as Europe managed its transition away from Russian energy, Putin's cronies looked elsewhere to sell their stuff. Russian energy is not disappearing entirely from global markets. Russian liquefied natural gas still finds buyers, and the country continues to use oil exports as a source of revenue for domestic and war spending. Russia forecasts that its energy export revenues will indeed increase in 2024, despite the imposition of sanctions, import bans, and the U.S.-led oil price cap on oil exports. The latter of those, I would like to comment on briefly, designed to reduce Russian oil export revenue without spiking global prices. We now see that this price cap is leaking. Colleagues from CSIS recently wrote, and I quote, "Overall, embargoes and price caps have only had a modest impact on Russian state finances. Russia's export volumes have held up thanks to its shadow tanker fleet, and despite crackdowns and pressure on dodgy traders, it's been hard to curtail activities in dark corners of the oil market that enable Russian export. The reality is," end quote, "the reality is that demand for energy products combined with sophisticated markets means that energy will find ways into global marketplaces. More effective enforcement may help, but the U.S. needs to think strategically about how to contain Russia's influence over global energy markets while providing alternatives for energy importing countries like those in Europe. That means focusing on developing clean energy economies around the world and allowing U.S. export volumes of oil and gas to contribute to well-supplied and less volatile energy markets globally." I'm going to end my comments there. Thank you very much. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Before I